On June 2nd, 2015, rumors began circulating on the web about Bandai Namco's potential announcement of Dark Souls 3 at E3 2015. One noteworthy aspect of the rumor was the speculation that Hidetaka Miyazaki would return as the director of the game. It had only been 3 months since the release of Bloodborne, and 2 months since the launch of Scholar of the First Sin. Additionally, just 2 weeks prior, Shuhei Yoshida had confirmed that Bloodborne would get an expansion to be announced later that year. Consequently, hearing this rumor seemed almost too good to be true. Nonetheless, this rumor ignited a wave of excitement within the gaming community, particularly with the news of Miyazaki's potential return to direct the game. Their excitement reached new heights 4 days later, when leaked screenshots of Dark Souls 3 began circulating online.
Hey everyone, welcome to I'm Adam Kovic.
And I'm Bruce Green.
Let's talk about Dark Souls 3.
Yeah,
What?
it's Rumor Friday, baby!
What? Yeah.
Or whatever, News Friday, breaking news. It's Friday and we got some fresh leaked information for Dark Souls 3.
Praise the sun! Or whatever.
I don't really remember.
Just to be clear, we are breaking this info. We obtained leaked information and screenshots of Dark Souls 3, so this is the first place you'll see or hear this information. Welcome new people.
Yes, hit him with a screenshot! Boom! Oh, damn! Oh, damn!
Oh, beautiful!
Joel, you gotta be a hype man for us, alright?
Boomed. Oh, kaboom!
You don't even care about Dark Souls, whatever. Anyway, first taste is free, the rest is going to cost you. So first off, Dark Souls 3 is coming to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2016. PC is listed, but it says negotiable next to it. What does that mean, Lawrence?
Good question. We interpret that to mean that, like all of the Dark Souls games, PC is kind of hanging by a thread. If the game sells well and they have the manpower and the extra time and just kind of feel like it, they might work on a port for it, but they're not dedicating to it right now.
All right, very interesting.
Yeah, the game lists the numbers of players from 1 to 4, too, which is kind of interesting. It's possible that you can summon more than one helper dude, kind of like you could in Bloodborne.
Yeah.
Or they're adding in a PvP duel arena like in Dark Souls 2. We're really not sure exactly what the player count means.
Yeah, it's interesting. We also got a list of planned content for the game, so brace yourselves for numbers.
I love numbers. I love them.
There will be 10 playable classes, with all of them available at the beginning of the game.
There will also be 45 new enemies and 15 new bosses, with a note saying that characters and monsters from previous games are not included in that count.
As always, it's always kind of a spiritual successor from the previous game.
Yeah.
The same goes for weapons and armor, 100 new weapons and 40 new armor sets, with returning equipment not counting in that number.
Yeah, we're getting 200 new items, which includes spells, rings, and consumables.
60 minutes of cutscenes,
Wow.
woohoo joy, with a note that more of them will be in-engine rather than pre-rendered. Lawrence?
The leaked screenshots almost confirmed that the rumored Dark Souls 3 was indeed a possibility. Eric Kane commented on the leaked screenshots, stating, "If I were a betting man, I'd say that between the very soulsy minutia and incredibly detailed screenshots, this leak appears to be the real deal. The timetable for release seems pretty much perfect. The graphics are about what we'd expect, and this clearly bears from software's mark. Now, we can only hope that Souls creator Hidetaka Miyazaki is at the helm once more." With E3 2015 just 2 weeks away, fans were brimming with anticipation and high expectations for a guaranteed official reveal from both Bandai Namco and From Software. Fortunately, the two companies didn't disappoint. On the night of June 15th, 2015, during Microsoft's E3 press conference, Dark Souls 3 was officially unveiled to the world for the first time. The trailer reveal sparked a surge of excitement and anticipation among Souls fans. Here are some comments from various forums where fans shared their enthusiasm. Wow, seriously, I've watched this trailer about 10 times and I still get chills. It's beautiful, absolutely breathtaking. This is going to be so good. If there's one franchise I can't get enough sequels of, it's this one. I honestly can't wait for this. God, I just love this stuff. I believe in you from Software. I've liked all your games. If Miyazaki is at the helm, I have the utmost confidence in Dark Souls 3. Period. Pre-ordered. Done. In our Bloodborne video, you may recall that one day after the official reveal, Miyazaki and his team hosted a closed-door session with select journalists to privately showcase the gameplay. As you may remember, we featured footage of Kyle Prahl, who had the opportunity to witness the exclusive reveal of Bloodborne's gameplay. Similarly, for Dark Souls 3, on June 16th, one day after its official reveal, select journalists and YouTubers were invited to attend a closed-door session where Miyazaki demonstrated the gameplay. Once again, we have Kyle Prahl sharing his experience.
Hey PlayStation Universe, it's Kyle Prahl, and I'm here to tell you about Dark Souls 3. We just got out of an extended 30-minute gameplay session with none other than the legendary Hidetaka Miyazaki himself. Miyazaki played through a substantial portion of what could be the early part of the game, but I want to really communicate this big takeaway of mine, which is that Dark Souls 3 feels like a Dark Souls game for Bloodborne fans. Now, I say that because there are very clear inspirations from Bloodborne heading into Dark Souls. Most notably, you have weapon stances, right? So at one point, Miyazaki pulls out a greatsword, demonstrates that there is a ready stance that opens up new attacks, new lunges. It's kind of like the trick weapons from Bloodborne with an even more varied moveset, rather than the trick weapon simply, yielding extra devastation at a price or just some new attack. It almost opens up new offensive opportunities with a couple new moves, new combos. Those weapon stances are an interesting element that carries over from Bloodborne.
Following the closed-door session showcasing the gameplay, a fortunate few even had the opportunity to interview Miyazaki. If you recall from our Dark Souls 2 video, we had Dave Klein interview Yui Tanimura during E3 2013. Here he is once more, sharing his experience of interviewing Miyazaki for Dark Souls 3.
Hey, what's up guys? I'm Dave Klein, also known as Dave Control, and I had the opportunity to interview Hidetaka Miyazaki, which is something you do not turn down. I'm exhausted. I just got home from E3, but I just couldn't not try to put this together and share this with you guys right away. But there's a reason I'm doing this pre-thing, which is that it's this pre-video, which is essentially that I wasn't allowed to take any video footage of the interview, and I was allowed to record the audio, which is what I did, but I couldn't actually share the audio either. I had to literally transcribe it, and I'm going to be sharing on screen the quotes and reading it off, what I got from this interview. But it is a one-on-one interview. So I either had the option to interview the global producer without Miyazaki-san being involved, or interview the man himself and do these stipulations, which you don't turn that down. So I was incredibly excited, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. So I hope you guys do enjoy this. I don't know who else got an opportunity like this. It's crazy. So, and I'll have another video later on about just my general impressions and other Q&A things that were answered when I did the Q&A. But I hope you guys enjoyed the one-on-one interview, and what I end up trying to do with it to make it work.
During these interview sessions, one of the key messages that Miyazaki shared was about the status of Dark Souls 3 in the series. He said, Dark Souls 3 is a turning point for the Dark Souls series. Dark Souls has a truly unique worldview. Continuously releasing titles for this series isn't a good idea due to that uniqueness. This project will likely mark a turning point for From Software as a whole. In subsequent interviews, he explicitly confirmed that Dark Souls 3 would be his final work for the series, making this game our last chance to experience a Miyazaki-designed Dark Souls game. This is the story of the making of Dark Souls 3, and how it brought forth the creative genius of Hidetaka Miyazaki, crafting the final form and evolution of the beloved series. Join me as we explore its creation and uncover the fascinating journey behind Miyazaki's fourth masterpiece. In June 2013, at the age of 39, Hidetaka Miyazaki was busily working as the game director on the development of the PS4 exclusive title, Bloodborne. Simultaneously, Dark Souls 2 was also in development, led by its own game director, Yui Tanimura. Unknown to the public, there was yet another game in development alongside these two projects. This unannounced game was Dark Souls 3. As we covered in our Dark Souls 2 video, Bandai Namco was eager to continue the Dark Souls franchise, even going so far as to start developing the first sequel without Miyazaki, and within the same month as the original's release. For Dark Souls 3, From Software and Namco initiated its development, even though Dark Souls 2 had not yet been released. Despite the challenges encountered during the second sequel's development, and no guaranteed successful release, both companies decided to proceed with the creation of the third installment in the series. With both Miyazaki and Tanimura engaged in the development of their respective titles, a new game director named Isamu Okano was assigned to lead Dark Souls 3's development. During an interview with Western journalists and YouTubers at E3 2015, Miyazaki shared, including the prototype, development began about 2 years ago. The development of Bloodborne and that of Dark Souls 3 overlapped for approximately 1 year. Even more enlightening was an interview conducted with Japanese websites, where Miyazaki shared the state of Dark Souls 3's development when he joined the project. The host asked, "How did you end up taking on the role of director again in the first place?" Miyazaki explained, "When it comes to this game, I wasn't involved from the very beginning." The host replied, "Oh really?" Miyazaki continued, "Yes. However, the early stages of this game weren't going very smoothly, and it was our former president at the time, Naotoshi Shin, who directly asked me to get involved. I believe it was around the middle of the prototype phase, which coincided with the period when I was directing Bloodborne." Now, let's establish the dates concerning the start of development for Dark Souls 3 and Miyazaki's involvement as the new game director. Given that the E3 event took place in June 2015, and that development began 2 years prior, we can approximate the start date for Dark Souls 3's development as June 2013. Knowing that the development for Bloodborne concluded in February 2015, and the development overlap was 1 year, we can estimate Miyazaki's start date for Dark Souls 3 as February 2014. In summary, 3 Souls games were simultaneously in development, with Miyazaki initially focusing solely on Bloodborne, and later taking on 2 of them. This highlights the assumption by both From Software and Bandai Namco that what Miyazaki achieved for the first 2 Souls games could be easily replicated. However, this assumption was proven wrong, as both Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 faced development challenges, with then-President Shin himself asking Miyazaki to help save Dark Souls 3. Shin also took on the role of lead game designer for Dark Souls 2, a task he had never undertaken in From Software's extensive history. Miyazaki added, "I only joined in the middle of the prototype phase. That was the milestone where I started taking the lead. Honestly, when the team was working on the prototype, the overall development was not in good shape." This situation is reminiscent of the state of Demon's Souls, where the original director and their team struggled to produce a viable prototype until Miyazaki took on the role of the new game director. As Miyazaki's original team was still occupied with the development of Bloodborne, they were unable to join him when he took on the role of game director for Dark Souls 3. Miyazaki clarified, "None of the Bloodborne team members transferred over. Only I did. There were a few visual designers who worked on both titles, but that was the exception." Before we delve into the major topics of game development featuring Hidetaka Miyazaki, it's crucial to establish comprehensive context regarding the beginning of Dark Souls 3's development before his involvement. To do this, we need to learn about its original game director, Isamu Okano. As we discovered in our Dark Souls 2 video, Naotoshi Shin was responsible for assigning directors to game development projects within From Software. He initially contacted Tomohiro Shibuya in September 2011, and later assigned Yui Tanimura to replace Shibuya. So, it can be expected that Shin was also the one who assigned Okano to Dark Souls 3. Ultimately, just as Tanimura replaced Shibuya, he had Miyazaki replace Okano. Unlike Tomohiro Shibuya or Yui Tanimura, both of whom had substantial experience as either game designers or game directors before working on Dark Souls 2, Isamu Okano had comparatively less experience. Here is Tomohiro Shibuya's work experience before he became the game director of Dark Souls 2. And here is Yui Tanimura's work experience. Finally, here is Isamu Okano's work experience. It is true that Miyazaki himself could be considered relatively new when he worked as the game director for Demon's Souls. However, he had already served as the game director for 2 games before taking on Demon's Souls. Furthermore, the context of Miyazaki is quite different from that of Okano. Demon's Souls was a project that had failed with almost no expectations of success, either critically or commercially. Few people would have noticed or cared if Demon's Souls had flopped upon its release. This was not the case for Dark Souls 3, where the expectations were sky high in terms of commercial and critical success. This was after 3 consecutive profitable hits from Software, including Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2. It's also worth noting that Dark Souls 3 was following the extremely successful production and release of Bloodborne by Sony, and there was no way Bandai Namco would allow Dark Souls 3 to fail. So the main question is, why would Naotoshi Shin assign Isamu Okano to a high expectation project like Dark Souls 3? We may not know the exact reasons, and in truth, it may no longer matter, as scenarios like this are unlikely to occur in the future. In less than a year from the start of Dark Souls 3's development, Naotoshi Shin would be replaced by Miyazaki as the company president, and Okano would be replaced by Miyazaki as the game director. In less than a year, Miyazaki replaced both the president who initiated the creation of Dark Souls 3 and the game director who was meant to lead it. One of the first significant decisions Miyazaki made as the company president was to conclude the Dark Souls series, despite it being a highly profitable franchise with a dedicated audience that would undoubtedly have purchased future iterations of the series. As we discussed in our Dark Souls 2 video, the biggest gift Miyazaki wanted to give to the loyal and faithful fanbase was the creation of new worlds and games, as we have witnessed later with the record-breaking releases of Sekiro and Elden Ring. Now, you might be wondering what happened to Isamu Okano after Miyazaki took over as the director, and how did Yui Tanimura become involved in Dark Souls 3? We will find out in the next section. In our Bloodborne video, you may remember that we explored, for the first time, the perspectives and experiences of Miyazaki since he became the president of From Software. We explored how this change affected his life and work, as well as how he managed his time between his roles as the company's president and the director of Bloodborne. During the interviews conducted while making Dark Souls 3, Miyazaki's directorial responsibilities doubled, as he was simultaneously overseeing the development of 2 games. Therefore, it would be beneficial for us to learn how he balanced his duties and efficiently managed his time and resources to deliver 2 of From Software's biggest games. In an interview, the host inquired about how Miyazaki managed his time amidst his 3 major responsibilities. In response, Miyazaki shared an insight about the day he received the news of his promotion to the position of From Software's president. The host remarked, "Considering that you're juggling the production of Bloodborne DLC alongside Dark Souls 3, all while serving as the president of From Software, it's challenging to fathom how you find time to sleep." Miyazaki then explained, "I don't mind being so busy. It's quite stimulating for me as a game developer. When I first received the news of my appointment as the company president, I could hardly believe my eyes. In my mind, I was like, seriously? The reason I can fulfill all these roles is due to the support I receive from others. The internal staff and production director provide essential support, and I also receive substantial backing from our parent company, Kadokawa. To be honest, I feel that others go out of their way to accommodate me. I consider myself very fortunate and blessed, and I'm grateful for all the support." Miyazaki had been working on the Dark Souls 3 project for several months when he received the promotion to become the company president. In an interview, he shared his reasons for accepting the role of game director for Dark Souls 3. He explained, "I accepted that request for several reasons. One of them was that, through the development of Bloodborne, I was able to reconfirm the appeal of the Souls series and dark fantasy. I also wanted to explore collaborative development with other directors. In fact, for this game, Isamu Okano and Yui Tanimura joined as co-directors. Collaborating with them was stimulating, and they provided valuable assistance in various aspects. We were able to entrust them with certain aspects, such as multiplayer-related features and updates, which I believe was essential for the future. In the next sections, we will delve into the specific contributions of each co-director to the project. As we previously discussed, Okano originally held the role of game director for Dark Souls 3. When Miyazaki joined the project, Okano continued to be involved, overseeing day-to-day operations and managing the team, while Miyazaki assumed the role of the actual game director. Bandai Namco producer Atsuo Yoshimura clarified, saying, "Miyazaki is leading the overall production, overseeing the basic game features, providing creative direction, and guiding the visual design. Okano primarily manages the mass production aspects and handles human resource control." The best way to describe how Okano and Miyazaki work together is that Okano effectively supports Miyazaki's creative direction. As we learned earlier, Yui Tanimura was serving as the game director of Dark Souls 2, while Dark Souls 3 was concurrently in development. However, after completing both the main game and the DLCs for Dark Souls 2, he also became a part of the Dark Souls 3 team. We can gain insight into the nature of his contribution through Miyazaki's response in an interview. When the host inquired about the current progress of the game, Miyazaki explained, "The alpha version was completed a little while ago, and we finished data mass production for now. We are currently in the phase of making various adjustments, enhancing quality, adding missing data, addressing bugs, and more." Bloodborne was released not too long ago. Dark Souls 2's development was wrapped up, and some of our staff, including director Tanimura, joined us. So it's a critical phase moving forward. Tanimura is collaborating with me on map designs and providing valuable advice on how to incorporate elements from Dark Souls 2. While I served as a supervisor on the sequel, I ensured a certain distance, making his insights particularly valuable to me. In our Bloodborne video, we had an interviewer ask Miyazaki if he was concerned about the possibility of becoming more business-focused, similar to what happened to Shigeru Miyamoto as he rose through the ranks at Nintendo. We're fortunate to have this question addressed again in the context of Dark Souls 3. In an interview, the host asked, "Demon's Souls was a cult hit, but Dark Souls 3 is a blockbuster being sold to millions. Since you've become the president of From Software, there's a greater emphasis on the company making money. Are you worried that this might lead you to take fewer risks with future games?" Miyazaki responded, "No, quite the opposite. If we avoided risks, we wouldn't have positioned this game as a turning point in the series and the conclusion to the current storyline. I believe that the new projects we will be announcing will reflect our stance and the direction we are heading in." Upon closer examination of Miyazaki's actions, it becomes evident that he is taking more risks now, prioritizing new IPs instead of creating sequels for his successful games. If Miyazaki were merely another company president, we might have seen titles like Sekiro 3 and Bloodborne 3 by now. As early as our video on Demon's Souls, we've known that Miyazaki works on multiple game projects simultaneously. In an interview, the host asked, "How many development lines are typically active at From Software simultaneously?" Miyazaki explained, "It depends on the overlap in development timing, but usually it's around 2.5 to 3.5 lines. The most recent releases are Dark Souls 3 and Mobile Suit Gundam UC Card Builder. So, among the new titles I mentioned earlier, some have been in development for a while." Now, as Miyazaki serves as a company president, one of the key factors that enables him to continue directing multiple game projects is the use of co-directors. This model is not limited to Dark Souls 3, but extends to future projects like Sekiro and Elden Ring. In an interview, the host asked, "You mentioned earlier that the development of the alpha version had stabilized, but was it challenging, especially given that it coincided with the release of Bloodborne?" Miyazaki explained, "Of course, it was a very busy period, but for Dark Souls 3, I was fortunate to have a team of excellent staff, including Okano and Tanimura, who supported me in their respective roles. I never felt like I couldn't focus on the necessary direction. Personally, I also saw the benefits of parallel development. I believe there was a positive synergy where the development of each title stimulated and influenced the others. As a game developer, it was a very enriching situation." Miyazaki is a very private person and prefers not to be recorded in video during interviews and events. This is the primary reason why the only video footage we can find of him, outside of award ceremonies, is the E3 presentation he did for Bloodborne. We also learned earlier about David Klein's experience interviewing Miyazaki. Despite his success and recognition in the video game industry, Miyazaki consciously avoids the spotlight. In an interview, he explained his preference for staying out of the limelight. "I personally don't see any value in me presenting the games I create. I believe my value lies within the games I develop, and I want people to experience that value through the games. Beyond the games I create, there is very little value in me, so I tend to avoid putting myself out there. I think the most effective way for me to express myself is by having players engage with my games, and as I'm not particularly skilled at presentations, I try to avoid them as much as possible. One of the concerns within the Souls community is the potential for the Souls formula to become stagnant and lose its magic. Fortunately, an interviewer posed this question to Miyazaki. The host asked, "In recent years, the popularity of the Souls series has significantly increased, and it has become a flagship for both From Software and Bandai Namco. How do you ensure that each new game continues to evolve and doesn't simply rehash iconic moments from previous titles, like the battle with Ornstein and Smo?" Miyazaki responded, "You're absolutely right. We must be cautious not to fall into a pattern of repetition over time. Players have become quite familiar with the core mechanics of Dark Souls over the years and have developed effective strategies for overcoming challenges. However, I have strong confidence in Dark Souls 3. We are introducing new combat styles and more agile boss enemies, bringing a level of variation to the game that hasn't been seen in the series before." After the reveal of Dark Souls 3, many members of the Souls community expressed concerns about the game's quality potentially suffering due to Miyazaki's multiple responsibilities and roles within the company. In an interview, the host asked, "You've mentioned your approach is to provide full direction on games, but there's the matter of the Bloodborne DLC, which many fans have hoped you'll be heavily involved with. Can you clarify the level of commitment you're giving to that?" Miyazaki explained, "The bottom line is, I believe I can do it. I think I can handle both the Bloodborne DLC and Dark Souls 3. This isn't the first time I've had to work on two projects simultaneously. When I was working on Demon's Souls, I was also involved with Armored Core for Answer. Even with the original Dark Souls, I took on the roles of both producer and director. In the case of Bloodborne, while I served as the lead game director, there was another director-level individual who made significant contributions. The same goes for Dark Souls 3. In fact, Yui Tanimura, the director of Dark Souls 2, has already joined the Dark Souls 3 team, which allows me to focus on core gameplay design while other aspects are managed. As long as I am credited as the game director in the end, there is a certain quality standard that the game must meet. I can assure you that the game quality will meet those standards." The host then asked, "Both Dark Souls 3 and the Bloodborne DLC will meet that quality standard?" Miyazaki enthusiastically responded, "Yes." The host followed up, "Even though you're also the president of From Software now?" Miyazaki reassured, "Yes, even though I am incredibly busy. Juggling the roles of president and game director keeps me occupied, but it also provides me with a lot of motivation and stimulation. As a last resort, I can always set aside my duties as president to concentrate on Dark Souls 3. It's only fitting that we conclude this section with insight into Miyazaki's dedication to game design, as he openly stated his willingness to step down from the role of president if it ever interfered with his ability to direct games. During the interview, the host asked, "While players love the games you create, being the president involves numerous business responsibilities. Will you be able to continue developing games at the forefront of the industry in the future?" Miyazaki replied, "I can assure you that I will. To be honest, I entered the game industry not with the goal of becoming a president, but because I originally loved creating games, which is why I joined From Software. I also find game development more enjoyable. If I am not allowed to make games, then I might as well resign from the presidency. Of course, in my role as president, I am responsible for making necessary decisions and judgments. It might sound a bit self-assured, but From Software is truly an outstanding company. I'm also extremely grateful for the support of our publishers, Bandai Namco and Sony, as well as our parent company, Kadokawa Games. They enable me to delegate the mundane duties of a president to others, allowing me to focus on creating enjoyable games. I'm genuinely thankful to everyone for tolerating my whims." 3 weeks after the E3 reveal of Dark Souls 3, Bandai Namco released a special video showcasing popular members of the Dark Souls community and their reactions to the game announcement.
At the end of Dark Souls 2, you eventually got a lot of crowns that meant that you would resist the hollowing effect, which is, you know, your character's cursed, they hollow, they lose their mind. But when you have the crown, you stay sane. So it's possible that that crown might be related to that part of Dark Souls 2. I'm really hoping they bring back characters who we can empathize with, because that makes my job easier on the channel, talking about characters and stuff like that, which mostly focuses on the sad stories of the game, so kind of hoping for some sad stories.
With every new Souls game, I'm super excited about the epic boss fights, because that's what I'm all about, the boss fights. All the Souls games thus far have given you like a choice at the end. Some sort of choice to sacrifice yourself and all humanity, or something to prevent all this from happening, or just kind of becoming the ultimate power and ruling over everything if you decide to.
Just pure excitement. It looks gorgeous. Just really exciting. They didn't tell us a lot, but the stuff they told us told me that it's gonna be a great game. So I'm really excited.
It was very vague. There's not a lot to tell from the trailer, but it looks awesome. More player interaction, more stuff happening between players. Expanded covenant systems would be f***ing awesome.
Like, what does this mean? Could this be like, does it mean this is the Dark Age? Because Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 were as the Age of Fire was ending. Does that mean like, whoa, wait, are we in the Age of Dark right now?
We just saw the hands-off demo from Dark Souls 3, and my excitement is through the roof. It looks so good. It's like a dream come true. I want to play it so bad. I want to steal it and just play it and never stop. As soon as the world sees gameplay, I think the hype train will go off the tracks and it'll just be crazy.
It's fast like Bloodborne. It's the combat of Dark Souls. It's visceral. It's going to be amazing.
It feels like the Souls I know and love, and I can't wait to play it.
One week later, Bandai Namco released another video in which they asked the Dark Souls community how they got into these games and why they continue to play them.
I stumbled across Dark Souls from a friend of mine, his favorite game, and I gave it a shot, and it was really difficult, and it destroyed me for a very long time, but I kept hanging on, and then one day I was invaded by someone, and that was the day I was hooked. The day I fell in love with the multiplayer aspect, the invasions, the co-op, everything like that, and ever since that's been my #1 focus.
It's really impressive how many different ways you can play the game and keep that going. Having the past of doing all these different runs and like having it all on YouTube, it's really cool to go back and watch after I've done all that.
I think it could even be exciting for someone who may not be used to PvP or expecting it. Someone shows up in their world, they're having to make a split-second decision of what to do about this unexpected scenario.
Difficulty's never been the main thing with Dark Souls or the Souls franchise. It just comes, I think, as a byproduct of having good game design. So just giving your players a challenge and knowing that not everyone's going to like that, but some people are going to love it. I guess I'm just one of those people.
I want it to be harder. I want it to be just ridiculously hard that only a few people can actually complete the game. It's insane, but that's what I love. When I was on my soul level 1 run, it was ridiculously tough for me. I could not do it. I spent 2 days straight trying to kill Gwyn, and I finally did it, and it was like the best feeling of my life.
After you set a challenge for yourself in this game, a lot of people, they get that mentality like, I have to finish this at all costs. And when you finally do it, you finally beat it, like that euphoria, that feeling that it produces when you finally conquer it, there's no other games that really give you that.
For Souls games, everywhere you go, you still kind of have to be on your toes and thinking about it, even when you get further in the game. So I think overall it's the gameplay that keeps people coming back.
I think what hooks a lot of players is the unpredictable nature of every invasion. Every game is different, and not a lot of other games that can compare in that sense. It's the only game I've been able to play for 12 hours straight, and I want more.
Combat is fantastic. There's nothing really like it. Even though it's extremely high fantasy and things like that, it still seems like it's grounded in realism.
My brother is actually the one that bought Demon Souls way back when it first came out. Early 2009. It took me 3 attempts to actually get into the game. I got killed by the Tower Knight, and I rage quit. I stopped playing it. I couldn't do it. And then I came back, and I got stuck on the Man-Eaters, and then the 3rd time I finally got it. Ever since then, it's taken over everything for me.
It's really satisfying because a lot of it sort of is like you're working around that moment. It may take a while to get to that point, but every move that you take, every action that you have, all comes back to, all right, This is it. This is the moment. I win.
Now that we've explored the origins and background of Dark Souls 3, we can move on to the core topics of game development. In our Bloodborne video, we are fortunate to have plenty of topics about software development, the creation of new IPs, starting a new project, and building a team. It is only fitting that we begin our Dark Souls 3 section along these lines. During an interview, the host asked, "In your opinion, what is the main challenge when starting work on a new Souls game?" Miyazaki explained, "I believe the most challenging part is clearly and effectively communicating my ideas for the game to my colleagues. This vision doesn't have to be fully formed at the project's outset, but conveying my thoughts and ideas in a way that team members can grasp is not an easy task. Take, for instance, the regain feature in Bloodborne. I envisioned a more proactive combat system compared to the defensive nature of the Souls titles. The end result, as it appears in the final game, may not suggest a complex development process. However, conveying the basic idea to the team so that everyone not only understands the appeal of this change, but can also actively contribute to its implementation, was indeed a challenging task." As we learned earlier, Miyazaki took on the role of game director for Dark Souls 3. In an interview, the host inquired, "In the previous installment, Dark Souls 2, the director was Yui Tanimura, and you held a supervisory role. Will you be returning as the director for the series in a full capacity?" Miyazaki responded, "Yes, that's correct. I am actively serving as the director for Dark Souls 3, and my involvement is quite different from the supervisory role I had in Dark Souls 2. Just like in the original Dark Souls, I am directing the game's concept, art, level design, and more." In every video we create about the making of the Souls games, we consistently address the topic of the target audience, and there's a specific reason for this. One of my primary objectives is to inspire future game creators, and understanding the concept of the target audience is fundamental in game design. During an interview, the host posed the question, "Do you think both fans of the series and users who experienced a From Software action RPG for the first time with Bloodborne will enjoy this game, and did you consider the balance between them?" This question is particularly intriguing, as most new members of the Souls community up to the year 2015 discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, the Souls games through Bloodborne. Bloodborne played a substantial role in revitalizing the popularity of the Dark Souls series. Miyazaki's response to this question is surprising, and showcases what sets him apart as a game creator. Miyazaki explained, "Not particularly, and not just for Dark Souls 3. I don't focus much on such matters. I'm not adept at creating games with a specific target audience in mind. If I were to define it, it's for people who enjoy games and game-like experiences, but I don't narrow it down further than that. However, with this game, I do consider the recent experiences of players with Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne. I wanted to ensure that players who had experienced those two games wouldn't encounter excessive stress when delving into the game's concept." As in our previous videos, we consistently feature an entry where Miyazaki shares his approach to game development, which is centered on defining the gameplay first before anything else. During an interview, the host asked, "Would you like to see the Dark Souls universe expanded or experiment with different game genres in that setting?" Miyazaki explained, "I believe my philosophy regarding game development is to first establish a specific game system and then integrate a worldview that aligns with it. In the case of Souls, I initially devised the action RPG game system and then applied the mythology. If, for example, I were to create a simulation or strategy system and the Dark Souls worldview harmonized with that system, there might be an opportunity for the universe to expand into that gaming genre. However, the reverse approach doesn't work for me. I couldn't begin with a worldview like Souls and then attempt to fit another type of game into that mold." Miyazaki shared that while working on Bloodborne, he came to the realization that he missed developing a game with a diverse array of battle styles and features. This realization served as one of his motivations for returning to the Dark Souls series. He elaborated, saying, "Because of the nature of Bloodborne's gameplay, its battle style, and the role-playing elements, it's more limited compared to the Dark Souls franchise. It doesn't necessarily imply that Bloodborne was inferior. However, during its development, I recognized my desire to create something that encompasses a wide range of battle styles, incorporates magic, and allows players to don impressive armor. These elements are what ultimately brought me back to the Dark Souls franchise. Miyazaki further disclosed that his return to creating the third entry in the Dark Souls series wasn't solely driven by the game's features, but was also motivated by a desire to revisit dark fantasy after his experience with Bloodborne. He shared, "On a personal note, immersing myself in Bloodborne's gothic cosmic horror theme reignited my appreciation for a fantasy setting. I longed for the opportunity to explore its aspects from a different standpoint. I believe this experience is what contributes to the distinctiveness of Dark Souls 3. In some franchises, whether they're in games, books, or movies, there's a trend of subverting fan expectations. Fortunately, we have insight into Miyazaki's perspective on this matter. During an interview, the host inquired, "Are you not tempted to subvert expectations by disregarding the things players have come to expect from Dark Souls to ensure you maintain the capacity to surprise them?" Miyazaki explained, "To us, these things might seem like nothing special, but there must be a reason they're so well appreciated. We can't disregard them. It's a difficult question, and we answer it on a case-by-case basis, but this is a sequel. We must keep the attractive or good points of previous titles. We may reinforce certain things or change them, but never remove them." Continuing on the topic of meeting players' expectations versus subverting them, Miyazaki explained, "Dark Souls 2 was, of course, built and supervised by other people at From Software, so it matched their preferences. So, in terms of the world design and other elements, my preference is to return to something structurally a little more like the first game and Bloodborne, with the world being a little more connected." As Miyazaki was working simultaneously on Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, members of the community were curious if Bloodborne had influenced Dark Souls. The host asked, "How much of Bloodborne is present in your current project, and what inspirations have you gained from Bloodborne?" Miyazaki explained, "Different teams were involved in both games, and I'm the only person who worked on both titles. Nevertheless, there are some similarities. For example, the number of items players can take into combat has been adjusted to be more like Bloodborne. The combat speed was also slightly increased during the development of Bloodborne. When it comes to inspiration, Bloodborne provided me with an opportunity to look at Dark Souls from a different perspective. Dark Souls aligns more with the traditional dark fantasy genre, which is quite different from Bloodborne." Starting from 2014 and onwards, there was a notable increase in video games that shared themes and mechanics similar to those of the Souls games. These games were often referred to by the gaming community as Souls-like, effectively creating a subgenre within the action RPG category. Fortunately, we have Miyazaki's perspective on this trend. During an interview, the host inquired, "Speaking of Dark Souls-like games, it seems that after the success of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, they kind of created almost their own genre. Even other publishers are making Dark Souls-like games. For instance, with Nioh by Koei Tecmo, I very much felt that I was playing something very similar to Dark Souls in the Sengoku era. How do you feel about that?" Miyazaki responded saying, "I never considered the idea of having created a new genre. I'm sure that in the past, many individuals had contemplated the development of highly challenging games akin to Dark Souls. I suppose I simply happened to be the pioneer in that regard. If I've fostered an environment that encourages other developers to work on games in the Dark Souls-like style, it's an honor for me." Miyazaki answered the question in his typical fashion, but the interviewer didn't let go and probed some more, asking, "I'm not just talking about the challenge though, I'm talking about very similar game mechanics." Miyazaki explained, "It's difficult to answer this, but even if the same mechanics are implemented in other games by other publishers or developers, it still provides us with valuable insights because they have been implemented from a different perspective. This gives us clues on how we can approach other titles that we will be working on in the future, so it's a good thing. But just to clarify, I never thought that other games copied our titles." Continuing the discussion about Souls-likes and similar games, the host brought up the concept of the Miyazaki Touch, something that makes a game unique simply by having Miyazaki involved in its game direction. The host asked, "Are you familiar with something fans of Dark Souls in the West call the Miyazaki Touch?" Miyazaki responded with curiosity. "Miyazaki Touch?" The host clarified, "Yes, the Miyazaki Touch." Miyazaki admitted, What is this? I've never heard of it." the host explained. It's a concept that suggests a Dark Souls game lacks that certain special quality if you're not directly involved with it. For instance, Dark Souls 2, while a great game, was seen as lacking the magic of the first. It was perceived to lack the Miyazaki Touch, which elevates the design of a Souls game. How does that make you feel, knowing that your involvement in the franchise is so crucial to fans? Miyazaki shared his thoughts, saying, "I was aware that my approach to game design had a unique direction, but hearing that there's an actual term called the Miyazaki Touch is a bit surprising. Dark Souls 3 will indeed be distinctive. It will feature unique level and gameplay design due to the Miyazaki Touch. However, now I'm somewhat concerned about whether this term will continue to be used positively or take on a negative connotation after the game's release." To end this section on game development, let's find out which of his games Miyazaki considers the best. The host asked, "Which of your previous games has come closest to your ideal vision so far?" Miyazaki revealed, "I'd probably get into trouble with Bandai Namco if I were to say this, but it's Bloodborne. In truth, I love all my babies, so it's not so easy to answer that." If you recall, we covered a similar question in our previous videos, but it was in the context of Miyazaki's favorite game among his creations. As you may recall, the Souls community had only seen the cinematic trailer of Dark Souls 3 during E3 2015. However, the fans' eager anticipation to witness actual combat was finally satisfied with the release of Dark Souls 3's gameplay reveal trailer at Gamescom 2015. Two weeks following Gamescom, Bandai Namco released a community event video that showcased popular members of the Souls community as they had their first hands-on experience with Dark Souls 3. This event took place at a beautiful castle winery in Napa Valley.
First impression is I'm in California. What is a castle doing here?
I walked in and I couldn't believe just the size and the grandeur. There's minstrels in the courtyard, there's a pig on a spit, there's halberds and knights in armor and torture devices.
A lot of these hallways look exactly like Dark Souls 1 hallways where there's prison cells and you see these hollow undead characters that are sitting in there.
I keep on wanting one of these suit of armors to come alive and attack me. There's weapons all over the walls and I just want to grab one and be in the world. I just want to experience it for real, sort of, except for the dying part because you die a lot.
For a lot of people, coming to this event might be an article, it might be a brief video, and they move on to the next thing. For me, this is literally the next few years of my life.
For me, the most eye-opening part of the castle experience was how something IRL in real life can directly impact what you see in a video game.
This is a proper Souls successor to the Souls bloodline.
I think my favorite element so far is the change in the enemies. They're really aggressive. They seem smarter this time around. They just feel more like living, breathing people.
It looks so good and it plays so smooth, but it's so familiar. It's such a nice return to form, and with the addition of the sword arts and the sort of the new combat system, it adds so many different ways to deal with enemies.
The level design is more intricate than ever before. Like, there are more paths to go down, ladders to climb up.
Feels like they took all of the best things about all of the games and put them together. It plays so well and it's so hard, but it's so rewarding. This feels like the perfect amalgamation of all the things I love about previous games.
I definitely think that the game is headed in the right direction, and I can't wait to see what the future brings. The community is going to love it.
In our Dark Souls 2 video, we shared that Miyazaki prefers creating new worlds and intellectual properties, rather than following the gaming industry's trend of churning out numerous entries for a profitable franchise. One adverse consequence of this franchise trend is the fatigue it can induce among fans, particularly when games are released frequently. In an interview, the host raised this very issue, asking, "Over the last few years, we've seen a plethora of Souls games. Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, and then Bloodborne. Is there a concern that people might be getting oversaturated with the franchise?" Miyazaki explained, "It would be a lie if I said I have no concerns about that. I don't think it would be the right choice to continue indefinitely creating Dark Souls and Bloodborne games. I'm considering Dark Souls 3 to be the big closure of the series. This isn't limited to just me. From Software and I both want to aggressively create new things in the future. Dark Souls 3 will mark the last game where the development project began before I became president. The next title will be a game conceived while I was president. I believe that From Software has to innovate and create new things. There will be new types of games coming from us, and Dark Souls 3 is an important milestone in the evolution of From Software." When the network beta test for Dark Souls 3 was released, it received a mixed response from the community. One of the explanations for this lies in the concept of Souls fatigue. Furthermore, the Souls community has grown overly accustomed to the formula of Souls games. In other words, even if From Software were to take a pause in releasing Souls games, it might not resolve the issue of excessive familiarity. In an interview, the host brought up this sentiment, asking, "Dark Souls 3's network test beta received a mixed response. How representative of the overall gameplay do you think it was?" Miyazaki responded, "From a design perspective, there are various aspects to consider. The beta was primarily used to test the multiplayer component and was designed with the flexibility to make corrections and adjustments based on feedback. Regarding the map, enemies, and the diversity of character choices, combat styles, and the like, it only offers a small glimpse of the entire game. In that sense, it doesn't provide a complete representation of the overall experience." The host followed up saying, "I ask because I played it extensively and found that there weren't many surprises for veterans of the series. I felt quite comfortable with it, which is not the usual experience I have with a Souls game. There's a concern that it may have become too familiar, and the game as a whole might be more of the same." Miyazaki clarified, "Actually, the slice of the game shown in the beta is one of the most standard parts. The creation of the game began by working on the very standard elements and achieving a balance there so we can all be at the same starting point. It certainly won't be the case where the feeling you had with the beta will continue into the entirety of the game. You don't have to worry about that." Earlier, we discussed the prevailing market trend, where franchises are exploited until they are no longer financially viable. This phenomenon is particularly common in Japan, especially concerning anime, games, and games based on anime. The host inquired, "Is this because many Japanese companies tend to create a successful franchise and then continue to produce entries in that same franchise forever?" Miyazaki explained, It's very difficult to answer to this kind of question. But whatever the case, I'm not denying the value of bringing new installments to the same franchise. There are a lot of things that can be polished by doing so, or there could be things that can be accomplished just by bringing new chapters to a series. I'm not sure about other publishers or developers, but at least From Software believes that all the things that we have learned in past titles can be best reflected in future titles only by working on new franchises and new series. While there is a prevailing concern within the majority of the Souls community regarding Souls fatigue, some segments of the community hold the opposite view, believing it would be a significant mistake for From Software to discontinue a highly profitable franchise, especially when it is at its peak of profitability. In the case of Dark Souls 3, Miyazaki concluded the series, despite it achieving the highest earnings among all entries in the series. In an interview, the host raised this very topic, asking, "In the game industry, popular series often attempt to continue and extend the franchise. Why did you decide to put an end to this highly acclaimed series all at once?" Miyazaki explained, "I don't necessarily view continuing a series as a bad thing. It allows the development experience to accumulate, eventually leading to a masterpiece. Creating a beloved series is undoubtedly a wonderful achievement. On the other hand, deciding when a game series should come to a close and how to bring it to an end is not a decision to be made lightly. However, for us at From Software, we are a company that's open to challenges and eager to create entirely new things, to venture into uncharted territory, rather than continually building upon the same series. While it's difficult to say whether our approach is correct at the moment, it might be possible to evaluate our performance 5 or 10 years down the line. Miyazaki's decision proved to be both prophetic and correct. Within 6 years after the release of Dark Souls 3, From Software developed 2 of their most highly acclaimed and profitable games. Sekiro received the Game of the Year award and achieved 2 million sales within the first 10 days of its release. Elden Ring, another Game of the Year winner, achieved a remarkable 12 million sales in the first 3 weeks after its release. These 2 achievements would have been impossible if From Software had chosen to create Dark Souls 4 and Dark Souls 5 instead. We often hear Miyazaki use the term turning point, but what does it mean? In an interview, he provided clarity on its meaning. The host asked, "Is this game being consciously approached as a special piece that marks the end of the series trilogy?" Miyazaki explained, "I personally see it as a sort of culmination. This is a story that might not be directly relevant to our players, but Dark Souls 3 was planned and developed before I became the president, and From Software underwent a new structure. It's one of the last games that were developed under the old regime, so to speak. Naturally, preparations for new projects under the new structure have already begun, and to maintain a smooth transition, Dark Souls 3 represents a turning point for us. That's why we're determined to make it a valuable and interesting game." Continuing on the topic of concluding the Dark Souls series, the host inquired, "Will there be any more Dark Souls games in the future?" Miyazaki explained, "Personally, I don't feel like creating new Dark Souls games. However, I don't want to completely deny the potential of other developers from Software bringing back the Dark Souls franchise in the future. While I'd personally like to end the Dark Souls franchise, I'd still feel sad doing so. While I might not work on Dark Souls games myself, I would bring some of the good things from them, like in-game elements or product development experience, to new Dark Souls-like games or franchises in the future. When I say Dark Souls-like games, they could be dark fantasy-like games with an element of sense of accomplishment due to overcoming difficulties, which is very unique to the Souls franchise." In the previous topic, Miyazaki addressed the possibility of Dark Souls in the future, emphasizing that it wouldn't involve him as a game creator, but rather providing the opportunity for others to work on it. He made his intentions clear, stating, "For me, Dark Souls 3 is the end. But that doesn't mean the end for Dark Souls. If someone other than myself, like another staff member, wants to make a Dark Souls, then I don't want to deny others from making future installments." During the interviews conducted while Dark Souls 3 was in development, there was no news yet regarding later games like Dark Souls Remastered or Demon's Souls Remake. However, Miyazaki had been vocal in expressing his support for future remasters or remakes. Miyazaki explained, "I've mentioned this before, but Sony Interactive Entertainment holds the rights to Demon's Souls, and Bandai Namco Entertainment holds the rights to Dark Souls, so they have the authority over remasters and remakes. Thus, I'm not in a position to provide specific comments on these matters. Concerning the possibility of an external team being involved in creating a remaster or remake, I am not opposed to this idea in any way. If such a situation were to arise, I know that both Sony and Bandai Namco are committed to maintaining the integrity of these titles, and I have confidence that they would assemble a highly skilled team that is an appropriate fit. In an interview, the host inquired about the possibility of spin-off games or derivative works based on the Dark Souls universe. Miyazaki responded, Dark Souls 3 will, as with previous titles, feature additional story content released through DLC. Nonetheless, there are presently no plans for sequels, spin-off games, or other derivative works. Nevertheless, I can't entirely rule out the possibility. There's always a slight chance. For instance, if 5 years from now, the developers at From Software insist strongly, we must create another Dark Souls sequel, I wouldn't completely dismiss the idea and might allow them to initiate a new project. What I can confirm for now is that in my mind, the Dark Souls series has come to an end. Rather than continuing to make sequels, I believe it's time to take a step forward and create something new. The development of a brand new IP has already begun, and work is underway. Now that the Dark Souls series has concluded, it's valuable to gain insight into Miyazaki's perspective on the series as a whole. In an interview, the host asked, "Since the first installment of the series was released in 2011, 6 years have passed, and it has finally come to an end. Did you manage to achieve what you wanted?" Miyazaki shared, I'm sorry, but I can't say that everything I wanted to accomplish was realized. Similar to all the games I directed, each entry in the Dark Souls series had its own share of issues and shortcomings. However, as a foundational principle, I do consider the Dark Souls series a success. Most importantly, we had the opportunity to have many players play, enjoy, appreciate, and provide enthusiastic feedback. This nourished both the series and us. As someone who has been involved in the production, from the inception of the original concept for the first game to the second DLC of Dark Souls 3, I am genuinely thankful for that. Continuing on the theme of retrospection, the host posed the question, with the Dark Souls series coming to an end, what kind of experience has this journey of creating the series been for you? Miyazaki responded, looking back now, I feel it's been a fortunate and joyful journey. I was given the opportunity to embark on this journey with the publisher Bandai Namco, the From Software development team, and the supportive player community. Together, we've created many memories and moments of inspiration. A game like the Dark Souls series, where you can barely take a few steps without dying, where you don't even understand what kind of potions are being sold in the shops, and where there are no clear maps, could become so beloved by players and earn a strong reputation. I consider myself very fortunate. These past 6 or 7 years have been invaluable to me, and I couldn't have imagined where I am today 10 years ago. To ensure that this journey isn't in vain, I'm also embarking on a new journey to create better games for the players who have supported us. As an intriguing way to conclude this section on the series ending, let's revisit the host's question about the franchise's inception. The host asked, when you were creating the first game, did you ever envision that the series would extend this far? Miyazaki explained, absolutely not. When we were in the planning stages of the first game, and even during development, the thought of the series reaching this point was far from our minds. Even if that were the case, I don't believe I could have intentionally crafted something with the anticipation of a sequel. The Souls games have a long history with the Tokyo Game Show, beginning with the disastrous demo of Demon's Souls in 2008, and continuing to the triumphant showcase of Bloodborne in 2014. On the first day of TGS 2015, the Souls community was treated to 2 Dark Souls videos. The first was a brief trailer for the game. The second video provided 4 minutes of actual Dark Souls 3 gameplay, offering a glimpse of the early sections of the game. Our first entry in this section about future games is one of the most interesting, not because it will reveal a specific title Miyazaki will create, which is time-bound and of limited value. Instead, this topic holds significance because it provides insight into how he perceives new games. In an interview, the host inquired, "What kind of game would you like to develop in the future?" Miyazaki explained, "Since I've already begun work on several projects, it would be a spoiler if I were to disclose details. However, one thing I can share is that our approach to game development remains consistent. When creating a new game, we are not fixated on making something resembling Dark Souls, nor are we exclusively focused on making something entirely distinct from it. Without preoccupying ourselves with the notion of similarity to Dark Souls, I intend to craft a game that I am currently passionate about and that I find engaging and meaningful. Miyazaki addressed the same question in another interview, offering more concrete details and a less theoretical perspective. He stated, "From Software is renowned not only for fantasy games, but also for creating sci-fi mech games like Armored Core, and various Japanese-style games, such as ninja games. So, in upcoming titles, I might explore new directions within those genres and themes that From Software has previously ventured into." We're fortunate that the host asked Miyazaki about the genre he would like to explore given the opportunity. The host inquired, "As the director, is there a specific genre you'd like to delve into, irrespective of whether it's currently in development?" Miyazaki shared, That's a tricky question. There are many things I'd like to discuss, but they could easily lead to spoilers. However, currently, there's a genre that I'm quite eager to explore, although its feasibility is somewhat low. It's a fusion of fantasy and mecha, something akin to the tabletop RPGs Worth Blade or The Vision of Escaflowne. The host responded, "I'd really love to see that." Miyazaki continued, "I'd love to create it too, but I often hear, it's better not to. So I'd be delighted if users could engage in discussions and say, doesn't that sound interesting? It would be fantastic to spark such conversations and use them in a somewhat speculative proposal to convey, fantasy mecha can work. Even at From Software, we released a title called Frame Gride for the Dreamcast, so I don't believe it's entirely implausible. One of the major franchises of From Software before the success of the Souls games is Armored Core. This is where Miyazaki began his career in the company. In an interview, the host asked, "Regarding the future of From Software, I'm also curious about the Armored Core series, which hasn't seen a new release recently. Will the series continue in the future?" Miyazaki replied, "Of course, even though some time has passed since Armored Core Verdict Day, and there were some challenging moments for the series, I have no intention of ending the Armored Core series." The host agreed. That's reassuring. The series had a relatively short release cycle, but it suddenly stopped for a while. Miyazaki explained, "Yes, especially for those who've been waiting for a new game, I feel apologetic. However, the concept of Armored Core remains highly appealing, and I believe it's still possible to create a game with substantial value and enjoyment. There are many talented staff members within the company who want to work on it, so not making a new entry would not be an option. Personally, it's a title that holds significant meaning for me as I began my career as a game developer with it." In our video on Bloodborne, we explored the topic of crowdfunding and discovered Miyazaki's fondness for the concept, to the extent that he jokingly mentioned using it to create games if he ever lost his job at From Software. In an interview, the host inquired about the Dark Souls board game, asking, "Considering its high difficulty and components, it reminds me of Descent and seems interesting. After its release, is it possible for From Software to localize and release a Japanese version?" Miyazaki responded, "I don't have control over the rights, so I can't provide a definitive answer, but I hope to explore possibilities for localizing it into Japanese in some form, and would like to work toward that." On a slightly different note, crowdfunding mechanisms, like the one used for this game, are fascinating, even within game development. The reason is that conveying the appeal and value of a game before its production, and having the audience understand, it can be quite challenging. Consequently, when the pitch is tailored to a particular audience, the project's content may become skewed in that direction. With crowdfunding, I believe you can present the appeal and value of a game to a different audience. Some projects can only come to life in this manner, and I believe it contributes to the diversification of games. Continuing the discussion on Kickstarter and board games, the host asked, "Apart from Kickstarter, have you ever considered working on an analog game yourself?" Miyazaki responded, "That's like a dream. Board games and card games are one thing, but I would love to create a tabletop role-playing game. But for now, people around me are advising against it. They can foresee me getting too absorbed in such a project and neglecting everything else." Since 2008 and the rise of smartphones, many gaming companies have shifted their focus to the lucrative model of creating games for these devices. In an interview, the host inquired, "So, what about smartphone games? Nowadays, most game-related companies are involved in smartphone games in some way." Miyazaki's response to this question is particularly significant and revealing because it sheds light on his commitment to crafting games that bring joy to players, rather than prioritizing profit. Miyazaki explained, "It's often misunderstood, but we do not intend to distance ourselves from smartphones especially. However, we're not good at game development that starts with monetization in mind. While it's natural for game development to be a business, monetization can make it challenging to maintain motivation for game creation." The host commented, "Creating something without genuine interest in it wouldn't likely result in a good product." Miyazaki agreed, saying, "Exactly. This is why we struggle to produce games driven by monetization, and it might seem like we're not enthusiastic about mobile gaming as a result. However, I think smartphones are fascinating as gaming platforms. Personally, I play games like Hearthstone, and I consider it a good opportunity. We are exploring possibilities in this regard, both from a company and personal perspective." The host continued the discussion, acknowledging From Software's emphasis on console games, and remarked, "So at present, From Software has more ideas for console games than for mobile games." Miyazaki affirmed, saying, "Yes, that's correct. Also, I find the current ability to create high-end games freely very precious. I consider the current state an invaluable opportunity, and I want to continue creating high-end games with all my energy to ensure that I won't regret it later. Most importantly, it's a lot of fun." Regarding future games, one of the most requested projects by the Souls community is for From Software to develop a game based on the beloved dark fantasy manga, Berserk. The community believes that Miyazaki and his team are the ideal candidates to bring this revered manga to life in a game worthy of its name. The host asked, "When will you make a game based on the manga series Berserk?" Miyazaki explained, "I love Berserk, and its influences have been clear since the first Dark Souls. For Dark Souls 3, we even integrated a two-handed attack that Guts often uses. However, as a fan, I probably have too much respect for the source material. Gameplay is always my top priority in the design process. Only when everything is right here do I focus on other aspects like the story. With Berserk, the story has become so extensive and developed that I probably couldn't fit it into an official game. Therefore, for the foreseeable future, it will probably only remain as numerous references in Dark Souls, including the third installment." In a separate interview, another host inquired, "Let's briefly talk about your inspirations. In the Souls series, I believe there are many references to the manga series Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Are you a fan of the series yourself, or do your designers incorporate these references?" Miyazaki replied, "I am indeed a huge Berserk fan myself. Even though I don't like to admit it, Kentaro Miura's manga is a significant inspiration for my work." On the first week of December, Bandai Namco released a new Dark Souls 3 trailer titled "Darkness Has Spread." 1 month later, Bandai Namco released the opening cinematic trailer of the game, titled To the Kingdom of Lothric.
Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. In venturing north, the pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones. Saint of the Deep. Farron's Undead Legion, the Abyss Watchers. The reclusive lord of the profaned capital. Yon the Giant. Only in truth, the lords will abandon their thrones. And the unkindled will rise. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be cinder. And so it is that ash seeketh embers.
In our making of videos, we frequently begin our section on game design by discussing the essence of games. As expected, Miyazaki has provided a consistent perspective on this topic. In an interview, the host asked, "What is your personal philosophy when it comes to games? Can you describe in a sentence what games mean to you?" Miyazaki explained, "I believe that the essence of games is built upon actions. For example, pressing a button on the controller can be considered an action, but when the act of pressing that button generates value, it can be called a game. Meaningless actions are mere labor, while actions that carry value bring forth possibilities. I believe games should offer players the exploration of possibilities and a sense of accomplishment. This kind of experience can only be achieved through games, which is why I'm so passionate about game development and can't resist it." In our Bloodborne video, we learned that map design is Miyazaki's favorite part of game design. He also shared that he personally laid out all the maps in that game, excluding the Chalice dungeons. In an interview, the host asked, "In the games you create, the most intriguing aspect is the intricate map structures. We often go through challenging explorations in Area A, open a door, and suddenly realize it connects to Area B. I'd like to ask what inspires your creative and unique map designs filled with surprises?" Miyazaki explained, "In terms of the logic behind map design, There's an element of, it's something you can only understand by experience, not by words for me. It's challenging for me to explain the reasoning behind the design in concrete language, and during development, I often find it difficult to explain to other team members why I want things to be configured in a certain way. If I were to describe it in a very general way, I would say, I place a lot of importance on the moment when the player understands the structure. It's like adding value to actions. I try to add value to the maps, making map exploration meaningful. In short, I really enjoy creating maps. If not constrained, I tend to keep making maps bigger and more intricate, delving deeper into the process. Miyazaki shared that during development, he thinks about the different ways that players can enjoy the experience, saying, I am conscious of that when I make these games. I try to make a game that has beautiful open spaces, gaps, room for players to enjoy it in ways that were not authored. I never want it to be where you have to follow the rules completely, where you have to do things exactly as the designers intended. I like to think that this way of creating, leaving spaces, is satisfying. When the player is inside the world of the game, there are various places where they feel they may be able to peek behind the curtain, pry open a window and see beyond. Still related to the topic of emergent gameplay, during an interview, the host asked Miyazaki why his games differ significantly from the majority of those in the market. The host inquired, what makes the Souls games interesting is that they deviate from nearly every aspect of modern gaming, from their high difficulty to their lack of compatibility with features like microtransactions and esports. Are you intentionally going against the prevailing trends, or is this simply a byproduct of your creative process? Miyazaki responded, I'm not necessarily following the latest industry trends, but I aim to provide the game with a certain degree of openness, particularly for the members of our community, to engage in special activities after we release the game. This includes events such as speedrun contests and the various endeavors the community takes on. These are things I didn't anticipate. It's based on the hypotheses that arise within the community. Each game I create leaves room for players to explore. Another example is the game's narrative. As you may know, we allow players to interpret their own storylines. The game itself doesn't automatically present the background story, particularly in the case of Dark Souls. This is one instance of providing fans with a certain level of freedom to create their own interpretations. It's always insightful when Miyazaki explains how he approaches designing difficulty in his games. In an interview, the host posed the question, Dark Souls is renowned for its exceptional game difficulty design. How do you adjust the game to keep players engaged, even in the face of high difficulty? How do you create deadly challenges while also guiding players to achieve a sense of accomplishment, all without losing the balance between the difficulty of the challenges and the sense of achievement? Miyazaki offered the following insight. In the design of game balance, I believe there's a crucial point. It's not about whether the game is difficult or not, but whether it's reasonable. The design shouldn't revolve around arbitrarily making things hard for players. For example, when placing enemies, the goal isn't to overwhelm the player with a large number of enemies in a dead end. Instead, it's about strategically positioning enemies in unexpected line-of-sight blind spots to catch unalerted players off guard. Players should feel like, I died here because of my own mistake. Following a death, they should think, great, I'll strive harder next time and won't falter. The objective is not to intentionally make it difficult for players to die, but to skillfully guide them to become more proficient after making mistakes and experiencing deaths. This allows them to sustain the challenge and conquer subsequent difficulties, ultimately achieving a sense of accomplishment. One of the highlights of playing the Souls games is undoubtedly the boss fights. Following the disappointment with the limited variety and visual design of Dark Souls 2's boss battles, the community gained confidence that Miyazaki was on the right path to delivering more memorable encounters. When questioned about the intricacies of boss design, Miyazaki shared, one of the aspects I aim to incorporate into boss character design is contradiction. Take, for example, the Dancer of the Frigid Valley. She is unquestionably a formidable adversary, but at the same time, players can sense not only fear, but also a profound sense of sadness. It's about introducing contrasting elements, not just creating intimidating enemies, but also infusing something more that players can perceive in each boss character. Of course, the boss battles are only exciting because the combat in the Souls games is top-notch, to the extent that it can spoil other games for some players, even when those games may not be inherently focused on combat. In an interview, the host asked, "The combat in Dark Souls 3 is a little more complex than before, but it's still quite simple in terms of the number of moves. If the game already has a high learning curve, why did you choose to keep that relatively simple?" Miyazaki shared, "The simple control system leads to very deep tactics when it comes to the gameplay, such as combat. And the team and I prefer that approach. That's basically the reason behind that. I believe having the relatively simple game control allows us to realize the game that we want to create. Basically, I want players to have a degree of freedom within the gameplay. Introducing a more complex control scheme would impose limitations on fans and restrict their freedom in playing the game. Therefore, a simple control system actually fosters a sense of freedom." One of the significant enhancements in Dark Souls 3's combat is the introduction of weapon arts, which adds a strategic layer to how players approach enemies in the game. The next question sheds light on Miyazaki's design philosophy, specifically whether he would focus on adding more depth to character classes or to weapons in the game. The host inquired, "So, weapons become more significant and gain importance. Are they, in Dark Souls 3, perhaps even more important than the player character? The character system hasn't changed much." Miyazaki explained, "The weapons you use become increasingly important as you progress through the game. They not only affect hit points, but more importantly, skills as well. Since the beginning of the Souls series, there has been a wide variety of weapons and combat styles. It would have been possible to give the player character more importance and options, but we chose not to do that. Instead, we wanted to keep the character system simple and straightforward. On the other hand, weapons determine which attacks players can use and which tactics they need to employ. I like this straightforward approach, and I'm not a fan of complex character systems." Continuing with the discussion of where to add depth and where to maintain simplicity in the Souls games, Miyazaki clarified why the starting classes in these games are deliberately straightforward. He stated, "We aim to ensure that regardless of the type of character you initially create, it won't significantly affect your choice of weapons later on. However, we're also striving to maintain the importance of the classes and the character you shape at the very beginning, ensuring that they continue to have an impact on your gameplay experience as you progress. So these are the two aspects we are working to balance, and the introduction of the new weapon skill system contributes to achieving this balance." In a previous section, we explored the topic of Souls-like games and Miyazaki's perspective on them. In an interview, the host inquired about copycat games, those that attempt not only to replicate the mechanics of the Souls games, but also their overall appearance and presentation to the player. Miyazaki responded, "I have no concerns about others developing similar games. It simply reflects the fact that players desired games that share the same challenging nature and provide a sense of satisfaction. We appreciate those games, and the approaches taken by other studios to create them are never identical. We enjoy observing the distinctions. We're entirely comfortable with the emergence of more games that draw inspiration from certain aspects of our games. Our primary focus remains on keeping the process of game creation fresh for ourselves." The Souls games are known for environmental storytelling and implied lore, rather than a direct narrative players work through. When asked what he finds appealing about the approach, Miyazaki shared, "First of all, I don't dislike direct storytelling. People seem to think that about my games. Actually, the truth is, I'm just not good at implementing direct narrative in my games. On the other hand, I want to leave the interpretation of the world's stories to the player. That's actually my biggest reason for focusing on environmental and subtle storytelling. Rather than the game itself automatically telling the story, the player derives more value from it when they discover hints of the plot from items or side characters they encounter in the world." As the Souls games have gained mainstream popularity, an increasing number of speedrunners have embraced the challenge of completing these games, introducing various additional challenges to enhance engagement within their communities. When asked how he feels about the players who embrace such challenges, Miyazaki shared, "That's been a real surprise. When I was working on the first Dark Souls, and even as far back as Demon's Souls, I didn't expect the player community to come up with speedrun contests or any of these unique new ways to play the games. However, I started considering ways to provide players with the space to engage in special activities like that after the games were launched. In that sense, my expectations started to align with the fans. Some of the things the community has done, such as collaborating on Twitch or playing with Guitar Hero controllers, are incredible. I've been very happy to see that kind of creativity. I don't think I would ever introduce trophies or anything to encourage a particularly unusual playstyle, though. Excluding the game Sekiro, it's easy to observe that the Souls games embrace a very European visual style, rather than the anime aesthetic found in many Japanese games. When asked what draws him to such a visual style, Miyazaki shared, "A lot of it comes from experiences I had during my childhood, including through fiction. I've been familiar with Western fantasy novels since I was a boy. Since I started working in games professionally, I've had a lot of opportunities to travel abroad and see buildings and landmarks in Europe and even further afield, churches and such, and they serve as great influences too." We previously had an extensive discussion about the closure of the Dark Souls series. However, we didn't delve into a significant factor that Miyazaki considers essential for the continuation of a franchise. Fortunately, this topic was addressed in one of his interviews. He expressed, "It's not a bad idea to keep creating new games in the same series if you believe there is more to add to it." If you recall our discussion in the video about the making of Dark Souls, this sentiment mirrors what Miyazaki shared with Kiza McDonald during her interview with him. One additional factor that is important to Miyazaki when accepting a new project is having creative freedom to execute his vision. He shared, "I believe that there is a certain freedom when it comes to creativity. It's quite evident that the Dark Souls franchise is reaching a turning point, and I'm pleased that I have a larger budget for the third game, along with the creative freedom to make my own decisions. However, if there were restrictions on what I could create, I definitely wouldn't want to work on it." In our video about Demon's Souls, we delved into a significant question. Why did the game succeed, despite the numerous obstacles it faced, including minimal marketing, an intense difficulty that was unheard of at the time, an unfamiliar combat style and control scheme, and more? Fortunately, towards the conclusion of the Dark Souls series, this question was once again addressed by Miyazaki. He stated, "I can't definitively explain the reasons for the series' success, but I can say that I have been fortunate. Fortunate because I discovered a vast and incredibly supportive community for these games. Two reasons come to mind. The first reason is centered around my belief in gamers. Gamers are gamers, and this holds true for all of them. There are no differences between European, Japanese, and American players. After the release of Demon's Souls, I found that my belief was validated. The other reason is that players derive immense satisfaction from conquering challenges. I believe these are some of the factors that elucidate the success of the Souls series." Still related to the reason for the success of the Souls games is the topic of self-conviction. In an interview, the host asked, "Players don't always know what they want. Often, they don't know what they want until you show it to them. How much do you weigh the demands of players against what you think is the right decision?" Miyazaki explained, "I don't think I get everything right with my decisions, but I do have faith in the decisions I make based on the visions I hold. In order to make my vision come to reality, I place importance in various feedback, including those coming from test players. The reason I have this confidence is because I have a passion for games, and because I'm creating games for those who share that passion." In our video on the Souls Lore Bible, we discovered that Miyazaki maintains a master copy of the official story of the Souls games on his computer. Many members of our community have expressed a preference for not delving into the contents of the Souls Lore Bible. One of the primary reasons for this is that it takes away the freedom of players to formulate their own conclusions about the game's story and characters. In an interview, the host addressed this very topic, asking, "What are your thoughts on the interpretations that players create for your series and games?" Miyazaki elaborated, "I have no intention of revealing more information regarding the interpretations of the story beyond what has already been officially disclosed. However, I still believe that the game belongs to the players, and they are free to draw their own conclusions. Any additional information I could reveal would change their interpretations, and I don't want to do that. I'm very pleased that the community develops theories and seeks their own answers. There can be no room for a definitive answer. That would undermine the magic." When asked about the balance between what he shares with players and what he keeps hidden regarding the game's story, Miyazaki shared, "Only those storyline elements that actually make it into the game are something that I need to present as a foundation for players to construct their own interpretation of the game world. After all, there are things in my head that aren't in the games, so beyond that point, it's entirely up to the players. I have no intention of imposing any specific storyline on any of the players, and there will be no official statements made about the true story of the game. Closely related to the collaborative creation of the Souls game stories by the community is the sharing of player discoveries, whether through forums, videos, or various forms of social media. In an interview, the host inquired about the importance of facilitating player discoveries in the game. The host remarked, "The delivery of the narrative in the Souls series has captured the attention of a significant number of players. However, in many ways, it can also be seen as daring and risky. It demands careful thought and stands in stark contrast to the spoon-fed stories found in many RPGs, particularly those from Japan." Miyazaki responded, "I don't believe this approach necessarily hinders the game from achieving broader commercial success. Whatever the case may be, I believe that enabling players to uncover something new within the game, its world, or its storyline, whether it's a shortcut or a boss weakness, adds tremendous value to the product thanks to the feeling that it creates among players when they make those discoveries. So, we put effort into it. We aim to provide more value to the players, and some of that value stems from allowing players to make their own discoveries, whereas many other games are more direct in their information delivery." Finishing a Souls game is often considered a significant achievement, given the difficulty that many players face in completing them for various reasons. In an interview, the host asked if Miyazaki has a canonical ending for his games, saying, "There are multiple endings for Dark Souls 3, as there are for the previous games. But in your head, is there a single true ending? Does one of them represent how the world of Dark Souls concluded?" Miyazaki replied, "There is an ending that I would personally select, but I can't say which one is of prominence among the 4 endings. This is because all the endings, along with the gameplay leading up to them, are a precious part of the story that the player experiences." As mentioned earlier, the sharing of player discoveries and information is one of the core strengths of the Souls community. In an interview, the host asked Miyazaki if there is anything that the community has not yet found. Miyazaki shared, "Is there anything they haven't found yet? Well, there aren't any undiscovered items or specific gameplay elements, but Dark Souls is, in some ways, an incomplete game, and I like to think that it has been completed by players through their discoveries as they progressed. I'd love to say that the nature of this incompleteness was completely deliberate, but it is both deliberate and by accident, in different ways." Before closing the section on game design, there are 2 key topics we need to cover. The first one concerns Miyazaki himself and how he has garnered a following among fans and game creators. In an interview, the host asked, "First and foremost, I wonder if you realize just how much other developers look up to you and your games. Are you happy to be a hero for developers who might wish they were working on something a bit more hardcore?" Miyazaki responded, "It's only been 10 years since I started working in this industry, and I still can't believe that other developers would praise me in any way. Lately, there have been instances where other developers ask me for greetings when we see each other at events or award ceremonies and the like. Recently, a person from CD Projekt Red who worked on The Witcher 3 asked for a greeting at the PS Awards, but I've been happy having that kind of opportunity." And finally, the last topic related to game design is about Miyazaki's growth as a game designer after creating the Souls games. In an interview, the host asked, "It's been 7 years since Demon's Souls was released. How have you changed as a person in that time, and has that impacted your approach as a game designer?" Miyazaki shared, "Just like anyone else, I believe I've changed since then. Ever since Demon's Souls, I've been able to experience many things that I couldn't have imagined experiencing before. Of particular note would be the emotional feedback, both good and bad, from players, and witnessing the game's community grow. These, along with all the other valuable experiences, have spurred me on, and I couldn't be more grateful. In order to repay everyone for what I gained from them, I'm planning on making sure that the changes I go through are something I will take to heart in a constructive manner." On December 23, 2015, Bandai Namco announced a community contest titled My Dark Souls Story, inviting fans to submit videos and create their own interpretation of the Dark Souls story. The press release stated, "We challenge you to create a completely new video for the Dark Souls series. This trailer should target someone who has never played Dark Souls and is interested in diving into the series before trying Dark Souls 3. Showcase your style and comprehension of the Dark Souls universe and demonstrate your ability to narrate a masterful story." The first prize will be $10,000, while the second prize will be a life-size Red Knight statue. Additionally, 3 third-place winners will each receive one of the Lord of Cinder statues. If you remember our Dark Souls 2 video, Namco held a similar community contest regarding shields, which were actually placed in-game. 2 weeks after the conclusion of submissions for the Dark Souls story contest, Bandai Namco released a new trailer titled Shadows Ahead. Three days later, Bandai Namco unveiled a surprise game for the Souls community, titled Slashy Souls. This mobile game for handheld devices was developed in collaboration with GameStop and was not created by From Software. Slashy Souls offered a reinterpretation of Dark Souls gameplay, using 16-bit graphics and adopting the endless runner genre. Although the gameplay differed from what fans might anticipate, it featured weapons, spells, and bosses that would be recognizable to anyone who had played Dark Souls. Here is a sample of the gameplay from Slashy Souls. few days after the reveal of Slashy Souls, Bandai Namco organized a community event in Hamburg, Germany. This event brought together journalists and well-known members of the Souls community.
We are very proud and pleased to have you among us. So now, please give a warm welcome to our international producer on the game, Atsuo Yoshimura.
Hi everybody, I'm Atsu. I'm the publishing producer of Dark Souls 3 at Bandai Namco Entertainment Japan.
So now, let's enjoy.
This place, it's very mystical and it corresponds to the game. We have the same ambience.
It's absolutely incredible. It's like a great setting to actually play Dark Souls 3 because it's very like the game. It's very gothic. The atmosphere is perfect.
The thing I really like about Dark Souls 3 is that it keeps that element from the original Dark Souls, which is that it shows you the world in these amazing vistas. You know, it's one of the most beautiful games.
I think it's one of those games that once you're in, you're just kind of trying to constantly better yourself. Every moment, every encounter counts. It's going to be one of those games that fights back.
In the second week of March, the winners of the Dark Souls Story Contest were officially announced by Bandai Namco. The first place grand prize of $10,000 was awarded to Steve Dixon, who provided a comedic take on the Dark Souls lore. Dixon presented discrepancies in the Souls storyline by having a fictional historian and archaeologist offer different interpretations of historical events. What set Dixon's entry apart from others was his use of original footage that parodied typical History Channel shows.
We now return to Biography of the Chosen Undead, the Dark Souls story. Dragons hold dominion over all. The lighting of the first flame brings light and shadow, plunging the world into disparity. From it, the four Lord Souls are born. Overthrowing the dragons, these godlike beings brought about the Age of Fire. But the flame could not last forever. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, took it upon himself to venture to the kiln of the first flame and sacrificed himself to rekindle it. Jace Goodley is a professor and historian at Anne Orlando University, where he's spent the last 20 years trying to piece together the life of the Chosen Undead. The Chosen Undead was afflicted with the Dark Sign, a curse that drove men insane until they became hollow. He somehow came to Lordran, where he then collected the four Lord Souls. The Chosen Undead's task would not have been easy. What little evidence historians have uncovered reveals giant beasts, felled dragons, and slain bodies of knights who would have posed a challenge on their journey. But not all historians agree. Archaeologist Bartholomew Underhill, who specializes in relics from the Age of Fire, has his own theory on the Chosen Undead's story.
He didn't do it alone. He didn't. There are numerous soapstone engravings still remarkably preserved at many important archaeological sites, and they're calls for help.
Absolutely not. There is no concrete evidence these engravings were anything more than juvenile graffiti. Regardless, the Chosen Undead brought the souls to the kiln of the first flame and rekindled the fire, sacrificing himself in the process.
Restarting the fire would create a new cycle of light and dark, but many scholars also disagree on the exact events that transpired within the kiln.
It is entirely possible that he defeated Gwyn, let the flame die out, and then brought about the resurgence of what we historians now call the Abyss.
The Abyss, created by Manus, the furtive pygmy himself, and wielder of the Dark Soul. The Abyss threatened to swallow the entire land. Legend states that Gwyn sent his faithful knight Artorius to combat the darkness.
Yet it wasn't Artorius. We know he was corrupted by the darkness. Many believe, as I do, it was the Chosen Undead who defeated Manus, vanquished the Abyss, and put Artorius out of his misery. It's tragic.
The idea that it was the Chosen Undead who also fought back the Abyss is a fringe theory propagated on ancient myth. The events surrounding Manus and Artorius happened aeons before the Chosen Undead entered the picture. To believe they had any part in this whatsoever, you'd have to subscribe to the theory that they are some time-traveling being.
After the Abyss was driven back, many historians agree that a remnant of Manus was splintered, flown across space and time, only to reappear many years later in a land known as Drangleic.
The next time the Chosen Undead appears is much, much later. Many don't believe it's the same person at all. What we know for sure is that they sought out a cure for a similar curse.
Drangleic has very tenuous connections, if any, to Lordran. What we do know is that King Vendrick was tricked by his queen Nashandra into waging a fateful war against the giants across the sea.
Vendrick, upon realizing he was tricked by Nashandra, locked himself away in the undead crypt. Now, the Chosen Undead, whoever they are at this point, discovered that Nashandra is actually a splinter of Manus.
Speculated. It is speculated that Nashandra was born of a shard of Manus, father of the Abyss.
They defeat Nashandra, then link the fire, restarting a new age of light.
Or, more than likely, the Chosen Undead collected the 3 crowns of lords long past, which, when combined with Vendrick's own crown, made him immune to the curse, effectively breaking it. He then lets the fire die out. The end.
You see, it's a cycle. The fire is lit, the fire begins to die out, and the curse starts anew, and then the fire is rekindled. It's beautiful.
Is the story of the light of the first flame and the Chosen Undead one of death and rebirth? Or is there an unwritten chapter that historians have yet to uncover?
There's so much we don't know. We could be missing an entire age buried underneath our feet that would redefine everything we know about the Chosen Undead and the light of the first flame.
Unless more light is shed on this mystery, the Chosen Undead's story will remain shrouded in darkness.
Second place was given to YouTuber Artie for his much more cinematic entry, earning him a life-size Red Knight statue. His brooding entry effectively captured the tone of the Dark Souls series.
You and I, we're both undead. Hear me out, will you? I wish to ask something of you. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I can feel it coming. There is an old saying in my family. Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know. Thank you for hearing me out. Now I can die with hope in my heart. I must bid farewell. Go now. I would hate to harm you after death.
undead warrior. You must destroy the fading Lord Gwyn and become the fourth Lord, so that you may usher in an age of dark.
The soul and the curse are one and the same. The curse is a part of life itself. No one will ever be rid of it. Make your way to the castle. There you will find the throne, and your journey will end. Bearer of the curse, it is the only choice left to you.
One week after the announcement of the winners of the Dark Souls Story Contest, From Software released a video on their YouTube channel featuring an artist recreating a Dark Souls scene on a blackboard using just a single piece of chalk. Six days later, Bandai Namco unveiled a new trailer for Dark Souls 3 titled Accursed Trailer.
But then there was fire. And with fire came disparity. Heat and cold. Life and death. And of course, light and dark.
My feet are here firmly planted. I am a lord, and this is my throne.
You'll face death, and it won't be pretty. Enough death to leave you broken, time after time.
Could this be what draws me to this strangely enticing darkness?
You remain among the accursed.
On March 30th, Bandai Namco released 2 videos showcasing a collaboration project with screenwriter and director Eli Roth to produce an animation trailer titled The Witches. The first video provides a behind-the-scenes look at the creative process involved in the making of the trailer.
I've always loved medieval history. I always wanted to do something that was in this space with knights and fire. Something that was dark, that combined magic, something of the classic horror storytelling elements, but something that was very different for me. The battle is finished, fire is still smoking, the ashes are still smoldering, and then he comes in and he sees these 3 witches, and they invite him to sit down, and they say drink. And he steps in. As soon as he steps in, that's his mistake.
Right out of the bat, Eli pitched his concept. It was dark, it was creepy, it was visceral.
I came in, sat down, pitched the idea, and they went, wow, great, we love it.
This is exactly in the tone of Dark Souls. To see Eli's vision come to life, every aspect of the way, it's been a very rewarding process.
First designs, and you're excited about the designs, and then you get to see them move and their sound effects, and then you're excited about that, and then you're putting the finishing touches. At every stage, we've been more and more excited, and that's such a good sign.
You know, I've never had this kind of experience before, and Namco is just amazing. I mean, they really, really wanted to do something cool and innovative.
The pencil mileage alone was pretty intimidating, but we rose to the occasion.
Being a fan of the franchise myself, I think the fans are really going to enjoy this.
We were able to really come up with whatever aesthetic we wanted. We tried to steer to feel like it was in the Dark Souls universe. It's a game that I love, and now that I've done this and it's gone so well, I really want to do it more. It was really, really fun.
The second video features the actual animated short for The Witches. We are now in the month of Dark Souls 3's release date. On April 1st, Bandai Namco unveiled a new trailer for Dark Souls 3, titled Dark Souls 3, the movie.
A long time ago, in a world deep in the darkest ages, hellish fiends ruled over this land. But one man will rise up and raise a whole lot of hell. Bandai Namco Entertainment presents a brand new chilling adventure, Dark Souls 3, in a story of brutal retribution and redemption. A man must fight his way in an epic journey across this land to hold on to his mortality. For that, he'll need souls. Many, many souls. Nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run. The only way forward is to fight back. Again, and again, and again, and again. When you pick a fight with the devil, you'd better be stronger than hell. Dark Souls 3. Available on VHS on April 12th.
Three days after the release of the movie trailer for Dark Souls 3, on April 4th, Bandai Namco announced a collaboration with Meat Liquor and Sony to create the Dark Souls Wings Challenge. To get an idea of what the Dark Souls Wings Challenge entails, let's watch a clip from Clifton Chili Club participating in the event.
Hi, I'm Jay, this is Nick, this is Dave. We're back at Meat Liquor and we're about to take on their new Habanero Dark Souls Wings Challenge. Okay, so you've seen from the product shot what they look like. We got to basically take down 20 wings. If there's no time limit, if we do it in the fastest time in our region, we're in Bristol today, then we could actually win ourselves PlayStation 4 plus the Dark Souls 3 game that's coming out. If we win overall across the entire country, then we get a better prize again. So, first things first though, we need to try and finish them.
Yeah.
Chaps, are we ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, first wing at the ready.
And that's going to count us in.
Habanero.
3, 2, 1, go!
Now that we have reached the release month, let's explore the new features introduced in Dark Souls 3. The majority of the accessibility features introduced in Dark Souls 3 actually originated from Dark Souls 2. Thanks to this first sequel, future Souls games like Sekiro and Elden Ring also benefited from these improvements. The major accessibility features that Dark Souls 2 introduced are as follows: early teleportation, the ability to respec a character, an increased number of slots for weapons and rings, and variations in items and enemies in New Game Plus. The heat-up mechanic refers to the way bosses change their behavior and attacks mid-battle. We can already observe this mechanic in the first Dark Souls game, particularly in boss battles like Ornstein and Smo, as well as in the DLC bosses. However, it was first prominently applied to most bosses in Bloodborne, starting as early as the Gascoigne fight, and continuing up to the final boss. In Dark Souls 3, nearly all bosses make use of the heat-up mechanic, from the first boss to the final boss in the last expansion. Similar to the accessibility features introduced by Dark Souls 2, the heat-up mechanic was also incorporated into Sekiro and Elden Ring. Weapon arts represent one of the major changes to combat introduced in Dark Souls 3, and they were later inherited by Elden Ring. Regarding their incorporation into the game, Miyazaki shared, "The purpose of weapon arts is twofold: to expand the tactical possibilities and fighting styles of individual weapons, and to enhance the role-playing aspect by allowing each weapon to have its unique fighting style. They serve the role of breaking free from the fixed notion that a weapon's motion is limited to just attacks. It was a very enjoyable aspect for us to create, and we hope players enjoy it as well." As a side note, weapon arts are not limited to a one-to-one relationship with weapon categories. There is a wide range of basic weapon arts within weapon categories, and there are exceptional special weapon arts within the categories as well. There are even some unique weapon arts, so I think players will find exploring and choosing weapons more enjoyable than ever. Bloodborne introduced a fast-paced and aggressive combat style to the Souls games, departing from the defensive and reactive combat first seen in Demon's Souls. Regarding the influence of Bloodborne on Dark Souls 3 and its increased combat speed, Miyazaki stated, "We aim to maintain the weightiness of the weapons and attacks while making them slightly faster and more intuitive than in the previous games." In connection with this, concepts like agility, which were introduced in Dark Souls 2, are not expected to be included in this game. The idea that there is a bit of stress in the action until you increase your parameters doesn't align with the direction we are taking for Dark Souls 3. A common complaint among players of the original Dark Souls was that their characters looked unattractive when they turned hollow. This mechanic was changed in Dark Souls 3. When asked about this alteration, Miyazaki explained, "One of the complaints I hear from fans is that they don't want to look ugly when they're hollow. They've invested a lot of time creating their character, right down to the facial details, and they don't want to lose that. So I decided to introduce a new state, when you have embers empowering you. Hollowing is still in the game. I personally like it, but now it plays more of a role in the storyline." In Bloodborne, we noticed a significant decrease in the number of available weapons, with customization and depth achieved through the use of blood gems. When asked whether the introduction of weapon arts in Dark Souls 3 would lead to fewer weapons, Miyazaki clarified, "Those who played the second installment will have noticed the significantly increased number of weapons and equipment items. For Dark Souls 3, we intend to include a similar amount. We want to move away from a more compact selection like in Bloodborne to enable a wider variety of character builds this time." Hidden walls have been a favorite feature among the Souls community in the original game. In Dark Souls 2, the method for discovering them changed, as you needed to interact with a prompt to reveal a hidden wall, rather than attacking it. In Dark Souls 3, Miyazaki reverted to the original implementation of the mechanic. He explained, "This is due to my thinking behind this type of feature. I like to have coincidences happen during battles or accidental reveals due to swinging weapons around, randomly shooting arrows. I want to implement this sort of surprise discovery in a natural way when playing the game." Dark Souls 2 introduced the capability to respec a character, but it was in Dark Souls 3 where the ability to change a character's appearance after the start of the game was introduced. Miyazaki explained, "The option to redo character creation had actually been considered even before this game. There were issues that led to its development being postponed in previous projects, but it finally became a reality with this game. I can't provide all the details at the moment, but we've also introduced a character who is fitting for overseeing this function." As a final note on the new and interesting features introduced in Dark Souls 3, many members of the community have observed that the heroine in Dark Souls 3 is noticeably attractive. In an interview, the host asked, "Did you purposely make the Firekeeper cute?" Miyazaki explained, "Well, how should I put it? Maybe I was a bit tired at the time, but with this Firekeeper in this game, there are some slightly different aspects compared to before, and she has become a likable character. Not just her, but there are many NPCs I like, so I hope players will come to like someone too." Finally, Dark Souls 3 was released worldwide on April 12, 2016, and it received critical and commercial success. The game was praised for its visuals and combat mechanics, with many considering it to feature some of the best boss fights in any Souls game. Reviewers regarded it as the most polished and well-rounded work in the series. While it was well received by the Souls community, it did not quite match or exceed the rating of Dark Souls 2. Nevertheless, it went on to win several Game of the Year awards, including those from the Golden Joystick and DICE Awards. In terms of sales, it became the best-selling Souls game up to that point, even surpassing the record set by Bloodborne, which was already considered a massive success. Dark Souls 3 achieved 1.13 million sales in its first week of release, almost double that of Bloodborne. Not only did Dark Souls 3 break all existing sales records for Souls games, but it also became the fastest-selling video game published by Bandai Namco. It held the record for the fastest-selling Bandai Namco game until it was surpassed by Elden Ring in 2022. In North America, Dark Souls 3 was reported as the best-selling software in the month of its release. The financial success of Dark Souls 3 is one of the primary reasons why we dedicated a significant portion to discussing Miyazaki's decision to conclude the franchise. He chose to end the series at its peak, a time when it was breaking all previous sales records and had a guaranteed market. This decision is a testament to Miyazaki's courage, self-conviction that he can create something better than Dark Souls 3, and his integrity to pursue his creative vision and take risks rather than becoming complacent with a profitable franchise. On August 24, 2016, 3 months after the main game's release, Bandai Namco revealed the trailer for the first expansion of Dark Souls 3, titled Ashes of Ariandel.
Unkindled one. If you are like us, another forlorn soul, with no place to call your own, then show my lady flame.
2 months later, the DLC was released on October 24th, and Bandai Namco unveiled the launch trailer.
If you truly are ash, then it must be fire that you seek. You don't know how long I've searched. Go on, touch it. Then the ashes were too.
People cry, people moan, look for a dry place to call their home, find some place to rest their bones, while the angels and the devils try to make them their own.
I need you to show her flame that will burn the rot away.
to be a remembrance of this cold world.
Go and they die. They don't go to heaven where the angels fly.
3 months after the release of the first DLC, Bandai Namco revealed the trailer for the second expansion of Dark Souls 3, titled The Ringed City.
The close of the Age of Fire. The Ringed City is said to be at world's end. Past this heap of rubbish, as far as one can go.
Two months later, the DLC was released on March 27, 2017, and Bandai Namco unveiled the launch trailer.
Ashen One, thy gift of flame has taken root. And Uncle Gale will soon bring the pigment. Pigment. Colored like the dark soul of man.
The close of the Age of Fire. The Ringed City is said to be at world's end. Past this heap of rubbish, as far as one can go.
From every age and every land. It actually sort of lends credence to the old rumours that the Ringed City rests below it all.
One area where the Souls games stand out from others is their approach to expansions. In many games, a profitable base game often leads to numerous planned expansions executed in advance. During an interview, the host commented on this by saying, "DLC releases are frequently used to maintain excitement after the initial game release. In your case, From Software doesn't seem to have a strong profit motive for creating DLC, as you typically begin developing them after completing the main game." Miyazaki responded, "That's true, I understand what you're saying. In fact, we often face criticism from the publishing side. However, our current situation doesn't allow us to develop DLC alongside the main game. When we attempt to create substantial DLC, it inevitably diverts time and resources from the main game. We apologize for keeping our players waiting, but we want to ensure that the DLC meets a high-quality standard. While Dark Souls 3 eventually received 2 expansions, it's interesting to note that the 2 DLCs were originally intended to be a single expansion. During an interview, the host remarked, "Many fans were surprised by the connection between the story of The Ringed City and the first DLC, Ashes of Ariandel." In response, Miyazaki stated, "I believe that the fact that these 2 DLCs were initially planned as one large DLC played a significant role in creating this connection. It's similar to how we handled the first Dark Souls and Bloodborne." Many critics and Souls fans have noticed that the first expansion appeared shorter than the second one. During an interview, the host commented on this, saying, "In terms of volume, some players felt that Ashes of Ariandel had less content, especially when transitioning from the Bloodborne DLC to Dark Souls 3. However, it appears that the Ringed City offers a substantial amount of content." Miyazaki explained, "Yes, that's correct. I must admit that we have some regrets regarding the volume of the first DLC. We tended to think in terms of the combined volume of both DLCs, and there were aspects where we didn't effectively convey the positioning and actual volume of the first DLC. We might have fallen short in terms of providing a satisfying sense of, I've played one complete DLC, or the feeling of volume within the first DLC itself, including the selection of bosses and tough enemies, as well as new weapons and spells." The host responded, "Nevertheless, the boss battles in Ashes of Ariandel were quite challenging." Miyazaki agreed. "Frida was by no means a weak boss, and I don't think she was easy. In her case, it would have been better if she was just one of several bosses, but as the sole conventional boss of the first DLC, I feel it lacked a certain thickness. In any case, this is an area where we sincerely reflect on, and in the second DLC, we are trying to be conscious of these points as much as possible." When a DLC is revealed for a Souls game, many members of the community eagerly anticipate that it will provide more insight into the main game's story. However, as Dark Souls 3 marks the final entry in the trilogy, expectations are even higher. During an interview, the host inquired, "The conclusion to Ariandel has been reached, but this time, the focus is on the Ringed City. What was the reason for choosing this as the setting?" Miyazaki elaborated, "From the outset of the first game, there is a mention of a pygmy who discovered the Dark Soul. I've always harbored a desire to explore the concept of this pygmy to some extent, even if it's just a glimpse. This was our last opportunity to do so. As for the setting of the Ringed City, I had a vague idea of it since the first game. When we eventually began developing it, I realized there was greater depth to explore, and I somewhat regret not delving deeper into it." The primary setting of the first DLC was the painted world of Ariandel. During an interview, the host inquired about why Miyazaki chose this setting, asking, "Just as a Norlondo appears in the main game, we can see connections to the first installment here. Why did you choose a painted world from the areas of the first game?" Miyazaki clarified, "The motif of the painted world wasn't chosen with the intention of nostalgia for the first Dark Souls, especially. The purpose of this DLC was to shed light on a different aspect of the thematic elements found in Dark Souls 3's main story. For that reason, the painted world was chosen as the most suitable motif." The host followed up, "So it's about the idea of a detached world?" Miyazaki concurred, "Yes, that's a significant part of it. I apologize if this becomes somewhat abstract, but throughout the Dark Souls series, painted worlds have been distinct in that they exist outside of the cycle of linking the fire. This distinctiveness was useful in offering another interpretation or resolution to the thematic elements found in Dark Souls 3's main story." As a final note on the making of Dark Souls 3, a host asked Miyazaki how he thinks about his legacy in relation to the Souls games, saying, "When people think of Hidetaka Miyazaki right now, they think of Souls. Even Bloodborne is deeply tied to the design of the Souls games. 10 years from now, would you be okay with that? Or are you determined to make games wildly different from Souls?" Miyazaki explained, "To be honest, I'm really not interested in how I'm viewed. The only thing I'm interested in is to keep creating something special. Whether that creation becomes synonymous with me or not is of little importance to me. But I can't deny the fact that the Souls series is something special to me, so I'm happy to know that people have that sort of image of me. Even if that image stays with me, I have no intention of concluding my career without creating a game that surpasses the Souls series. That would be pretty sad, wouldn't it?